It's a great pleasure and a great honor also to be here. I'm also discovering an entire new geographical framework for issues and problematics that I've been dealing with for the past 10 years, last 7 years. What I did is to lay out the program, more or less, the program on which most of the green politics is struggling and fighting, whether in the European Parliament, and if you allow me, I will go beyond just the benches of the European Parliament, because, of course, we'd like to think this is the center of the world in Europe, but it's not. The problem is that green politics is as diverse as the green expertise on how to change and make it a better world. If you look, just a quick detour on history and geography. Of course, I'm not an economist and I'm not an expert, so I will not give you the full implementable response to any issue. Otherwise, well, I know a lot of politicians would like to do that, but I'm neither an expert nor a politician, so I will be in between. What I can tell you is my experience from the benches of a place where we're making law, where we're trying to define the legal framework in which the implementation of policies is going to have an impact on daily life, and you see that this is a very ongoing and long process, is that it's not where it happens. This is not the key. The key is not the institutions, and the key is not the European Parliament. It's an important player, but I'll come back to this. History and geography, a little detour. The history of green politics doesn't start with the foundation of green parties. It doesn't even start in the 70s. It starts way before. It starts whenever someone, a group of people, decides that there is something that is not good in their environment, in their immediate environment. It can be a nuisance, I don't know, the skin trade, for instance. I mean, it's been a plague in the medieval and the ancient Roman cities, for instance. And you can have traces of the first mobilization on the environment in Benjamin Franklin's, for instance, in the 18th century in the United States. I think it was in Philadelphia, but I'm not sure. Anyway, once you mobilize against a nuisance, against something that is deteriorating your environment, against something that is deteriorating your framework, your life, you start green politics. Of course, it starts as a not in my backyard thing, but the very moment it expands to not in my backyard, not in your backyard, nowhere, then you're starting to change the scale from an individual concern to a political concern, which is basically having a different representation of how the world should be. And with the nuclear, or pollution, with the nuclear movement, which was one of the symbols of green politics, you have that, of course, because if it's not in your backyard but in the neighbors, it's exactly the same. So this is where you change the scale, not only of action, but also of the representation of where you stand on the earth. And you realize that it doesn't stop here, but it doesn't stop there, and it's actually going much further. This looks very abstract for a lot of people, but the very moment you start to dwell on these issues, it becomes extremely concrete. So there is a whole history of activism. These are the first green politicians, the green politics in action. They don't need a green party to be there. A second stream is more recent. You see it happening in the 19th century. It's the big organization of conservationists. For instance, France Nature Environnement is one of them, and Greenpeace that happens in the 70s is the perfect continuation of this. What do they bring? Like, for example, they bring expertise. They bring concern. They bring a representation of public good, of the general interest that is not always represented in the public space, that is not always represented in, let's say, a Labour Party that is just dealing, that's already a big deal, but just dealing with the interest of the working class, or the ruling parties, the right-wing ruling parties that are just defending the interest of the ones who have. So these conservationist organizations, which are the blueprint of the current NGOs that are political actors, even though they're not political parties, have also a history. And as I said, they start as conservationists. I mean, we need to study the nature and make sure that it's preserved the way we are. They're the first ones to actually start the zoological parks in the end of the 19th century. And with the evolution of the framework of the environment, the political and the economic environment, of course, it will evolve into something that has nothing to do, but that is now a full-fledged actor even of international relations. If you look at Greenpeace, Greenpeace was the target of state terrorism in 1985 when the French bombed their Rainbow Warrior ship in Auckland. So this is the recognition that they are a political actor as well, even though they don't like party politics, which I fully understand. And then in the 70s, there is this big call, Club de Rome, no growth. If we start getting, if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to fall off the cliff. The collapse scenarios. This is the moment where there is a start of the crystallization in the political sphere of something that we can do something more than just bring expertise or just engage on the local thing. We can bring about a representation of the political, a representation of the public good and a better general interest within the competition in for the political power. Now this is the history. Then in the 80s, most of the Green parties that you know now have been founded, the Belgians, the Germans, then the French, etc., until very recently, I mean, the stream that is taking up not only Europe, and this is where I want to bring geography as well, but everywhere. They don't call themselves necessarily Green parties, but Green concerns is not just a wealthy country concern. It's just that the awareness that it should be green, the name, the label, the whole political frame is coming from the West. But actually, the concern for the environment, this is something that is broader. It's just that it takes a different shape and a different, of course, sensitivity when it comes to life and death. In the West, it looks like a rich concern. In the South, this is a life and death issue. Two examples, land and water. There are no better examples. In India, you have a big green movement that is not green as politics, but that is political movement anyway, that is called Ekta Parishad, that was founded by Raja Gopal, the new Gandhi. Well, I like to call him the new Gandhi. Of course, he doesn't do that for himself. Which is a movement of landless people. This is a non-violent movement, but this is also a movement that says basically, if you keep taking the land off the people who actually can cultivate it, actually can live of it, then you're creating even more imbalances and even more injustice. This is a green movement. And it's not exactly concerned with wealthy problems. It's concerned with a real thing, the real life substance of people. So it's not exactly a north-south. It is a north-south divide, but it's also an east-west. We don't have exactly the same perspective on development on both sides of the former Iron Curtain, and the more east you go, of course, the more acute some of those issues are pressing. Not least because the former Soviet Empire was also extremely, neglecting the environment. So this is quite interesting. I come as no expert of Georgia or the region, but what I see is that Georgia is exactly at the crossroads of those two streams of reflection, because it's south and east altogether. So the issues that are sometimes framed in the West need a local framing. The issues that are framed in the German or French or European Green Party Not that they're not valid here, but they need a Georgian or a Caucasus reflection on this so that it can actually bring about the change that it represents. We'll come back to this in the debate, I guess. The second point that I would like to come back to is back in the 70s, is because I heard yesterday, and also in the leaflet, a lot of mention of neoliberal. Well, let me break some news to you. The problem is not neoliberalism. The problem is before that. The problem is what neoliberalism is trying to save. It's trying to save the Fordist compromise. It's trying to save this compromise that says that if we produce a lot and consume a lot, then everyone can benefit. That's the Fordist. That's the development model of the 60s and the 50s and actually the 30s and the 40s, because it started in the US. We were busy with something else in the 40s here. But that's exactly what it's about. It's about growing the cake so that everyone can eat. And that's basically the consensus, the Fordist consensus, right-wing and left-wing, of the 50s and the 60s that drove Western Europe to the top of the development chain. That's exactly what the neoliberal consensus is trying to salvage. Because after the 70s and the 80s, when it's no longer possible to grow in depth because markets are saturated, because consumption is slowing down, because also there is competition emerging from the rest of the world, then the only way to maintain the level of consumption in the West is debt. Is to make sure that you keep people, even though they're no longer employed in the workforce like they were, you keep them with the level of consumption that they had, because you produce cheap somewhere else, and you finance them with either social security safety nets, which are, you see, no longer articulated on the fact that they're trying to make sure that everyone can get back into the labor market and not suffer in between, but making sure that they can consume still, even though for some of them the prospect to regain a position in the labor market is condemned. That's the neoliberal compromise. The neoliberal compromise is the perfect continuation of the social democrat and right-wing compromise of the 50s that was based on mass consumption and mass production. Well, mass production and mass consumption. This is it. So it's not the neoliberal framework that is a problem. It's the fact that the neoliberal framework today is accelerating, in order to salvage this compromise, it's accelerating some of the most unsustainable policies that we have of mass production and mass consumption. And no longer just in Europe and the US, but on a global scale. Why is it so difficult? Because at the heart of that, especially from a Western point of view, there is something that has gained the value of a religion. It's growth. Growth, it's three words. It's more, it's bigger, it's faster. It's driven by technological change, it's driven by consumption, etc. But it's also driven by imaginary that the sky is the limit. That there is no way you can stop. You don't stop progress, but you don't stop also consumption, you don't stop the production, you don't stop the desire for more. Why do I call it a religion? Because it's easier to make people understand that it's actually a representation of the world. It's a representation of how you feel yourself. I mean, what's bad in growth? Everything is good in growth. I mean, it's good to see children grow, it's good to see the plants grow, it's good to see things grow. I mean, it's so easy, it's so nice. And the good thing is that when it grows, when everybody's happy, because when it grows, when the cake grows, I don't have to share. There are more crumbs for everyone. That's the spirit, and that's the problem. The politics of growth and development, which are not the same things, of course, but this is extremely difficult to explain. You say GDP, yes, there are limits to GDP. Since the 70s, there was alternative indicators. They're not really used. I'm a former teacher in secondary school. I remember teaching GDP and human development indicators. But in the end, what's used in the media, what's used in the management, what's used in the institutional reflection? GDP, not IDH. So it exists, it's there, but we don't use it. We don't use it because there is a framework, a mental framework, a cultural framework that makes it impossible to change it for now. The problem is that politics of growth is also the politics of struggle. Class struggle, struggle for resources, and struggle for, well, some kind of a global Darwinism, you know, that only the fittest to the capitalist rules will finally survive. So what we need, and this is where green politics becomes key, what we need is to decolonize the imaginary, decolonize our culture of more, bigger and faster. Well, less, better, different. That's the start of green politics, basically. Less, not in less wealth, but in less maybe consumption or less waste, because this is it. All of this, and this is why I was talking about cultural changes, all of this is linear. There is a line of development, and it has a starting point and no ending point. It goes to the infinite. But we all know that it's finite. I mean, we live on a sphere, and this is global math. Yeah, okay. This is basic math. I mean, geometry on a sphere. If you keep going, you're going in circle. And this is it. This is why part of the green economy and the green politics and the green political economy is about circular economy, for instance. It's not enough, but this is a start. This is where you get started to change the way it works. Waste. According to the framework of your statistics, between 30 and 50% of the food that is produced in the world is wasted. It goes straight to the bin. I mean, if you don't change that, how can you change the culture of growth? 70% of the land that is used on Earth is used to feed the food. It's used to feed the animal that we eat. That is just a system walking on its head. And yet, it's extremely difficult to change it because of that reflection, because meat is wealth. And if you're eating meat, even cheap meat, you're wealthy. So the whole reflection here is extremely difficult to change. So the politics of green transformation are down to this. How do you bring about the cultural change? Will it come from the state? I've seen that there is a lot of emphasis in the state. It's normal, this is a very Eastern preoccupation. No, it will not come from the state. Actually, the state is the enemy. The state is, in its wording, the state is the establishment. The state is what is not changing. The state is the stability, especially when it exists. When it doesn't exist, you see, there is no stability. So it's in the words itself. A failed state is a country at war. The state is here to bring the stability, and it's not here to bring change. Never. It's actually here to make sure that there's a police, there's an army, and that you pay your taxes. This is what the state is about. So the change will not come from the state. It will not even come from the green parties at the head of the state. Greens have been in government all over Europe, even in the East. In Poland, in the Czech Republic, they don't bring the change when they're at state, because the state is more resistant. The state is the emanation of what we are and how we fight and how we organize ourselves. If you want to change the state, change the society first. So it will not come from the state. Will it come from the markets? No, of course. It cannot come from the markets, because the markets are connected to the yield, and the yield is never on 20 years. It's on a few hours, if it's a hedge fund, even a few seconds, or a few months, or a few years for the more patient of it. So it cannot come from the market. We're talking about the future here. We're talking about long term. Long term and markets don't come together in the same sentence. It doesn't happen. Or if it happens, there's a glitch in the matrix. So markets and state actually are working together against the green transformation. It doesn't mean that they don't have a role to play. It doesn't mean that you cannot use the market to bring about some changes. The organic farming is a good example. It's a market. It's a growing market. Hey, this is good growth here. This is a growing market, and because it's a growing market, it's important because it can bring about a change. But it's not the market that is changing it. It's coming from somewhere else. And the state can also be a player in this. The state enacts regulations and laws, and if the states suddenly, by a moment of lucidity, decides that there will be no more chemical pesticides or chemicals in agriculture, then it will bring about a change. But why would they do that? So, it's connected to the second thing. Will it come from the political parties? Yes and no. It's the same. The political parties are the emanation. We dwelled on that yesterday. They're the emanation of social change, social movements. One of the biggest problems of green parties in Europe, all over Europe, especially where they exist, even when they're strong, like in Germany, is that they have no strong social movement behind them. They have no one's voting for the Greens for interest, because they know that it's going to bring something. It's only people who think that it's nice, that it's good, that it's necessary, and they can change their mind from one election to another. And they can also be disappointed, and therefore they will change their mind. So the problem is, it will come from political parties only, and I'll leave this open for the next time, only if there is a reinvention of what public good means and the representation of interest. But the role of the political parties can be to drive the institutional changes. Once you have in the institutions parties or representatives that are aware that neither the states nor the market are the issue, but the third thing, where will it come from? It will come from the society, of course. It will come from the activists, the NGOs, of course, but it will come from the people raising awareness. This is where the connection between all those branches that I started with of green politics are coming together to bring about political change. So the role of the institutional parties is to make sure that initiatives, everything that wants to live and that wants to become something on the ground, at local level, of course, and of course at different scales, can and will be protected from both state and markets. I'm concluding with this. Green politics is the future of 21st century. Not green parties, green politics. Why? Because this is the only reflection, the only political thought that is trying to marry the best of liberalism and the best of what liberalism doesn't want to care about. At the heart of the growth economy, at the heart of this consumption economy, there is one word that is called externalities. Externalities is the positive and most of the time negative consequences of your activity, your footprint if you prefer. In accountant language it means I don't care. Maybe there's pollution, but what I care about is my balance sheet. And it doesn't appear in the balance sheet. Green politics is about that, and this is why it's an economic, and not only an economic, but a global reflection. It's the one political thinking that tries to reconcile a free individual, which is the basic. A free individual with the respect, the absolute respect of its natural planet and its social society environment. If one of those three tips of the triangle takes over, it's over. It's either jungle capitalism, if you want, or collectivism, or green dictatorship, if you prefer. Green Soviet Union. So some Greens think about that, okay? So we need always to come back to the roots that free individuals are the key to save this planet. And to finish on this, there was a study that I really like. I can't find the reference again, but I'll promise I will try to find it before the end. coming, I think, from a Swedish institute, which was combining two factors of changes and the speed of it. So there was the technological and the social change. And it can be slow or fast. If you combine slow technological change and slow social change, basically it's the collapse. This is the end. If you combine fast technological change and slow social change, that is, everything changes in the technosphere, nothing changes in society, and that's basically what it means. You get an acceleration, a concentration of what we have now, and in the end it's war. Because there will be no social justice, and there will be increasing concentration of people about the means of technological production, etc., etc. And I'm not going too far into details, but that's another kind of collapse, but it's not the same. If you get slow technological and fast social changes, then you got the neo-rural, neo-hippie, green degrowth idea. It might not be so bad, but it might not feed 10 million people in the world. So we'll have some kind of degrowth of population too. And if you combine the fast techno and the fast social changes, well, that's the only science fiction that hasn't been written so far. And it's just up to us to make it happen.
Thank you, Gaudot, for this very comprehensive talk. So we have about 20 minutes for the discussions, but first I will give you the possibility to react on Edouard's speech if you want to do so. If not, I will open the floor for the discussions.